Welcome everybody to this week's Pluralia Dialogos. Today, just so everybody knows, full disclosure, this is a pre-recording, not streaming live. This is happening on a Saturday, the day before you're watching this. So we're hoping that nothing too dramatic has happened in the 13 or so hours until this is actually going to go live. And in such a case that we don't address something that is highly relevant, either for the good or for the bad, we do apologize. But we don't have a time machine yet. That being said, I'm very happy that my good friend Joaquin Flores is here to join me as today's special guest. Joaquin, how are you doing?
Hey, how's it going? I hope I'm coming through all right. Some technical difficulties, but we'll see if we can make this happen.
Yeah, I'm sure a little choppiness is okay. The mind can piece together the fragments. That's the beautiful thing about the human mind. Yeah, is it seeks order out of chaos, and it's coming through pretty okay. So I think overall, there's a few questions I want to throw at you today. And up until now, this is a pretty geopolitical podcast with Pluralia. We've been doing this now for a number of months, and we've never really addressed the question of Epstein. For a number of reasons. It's extremely weird. It's a topic that a lot of people in polite society find difficult. They have a difficulty in bringing in the figure, the phenomenon that is Jeffrey Epstein into the topography of mapping out the terrain of the geopolitical, narratives that they're trying to make sense of. But over the past 2 weeks, it's been kind of unavoidable. 3 million plus documents dropped publicly. And, every single day you're getting more people dissecting the crazy level of uncomfortable reality that's been coming up in the discourses between Epstein and so many of his interlocutors, from Bill Gates to figures who are out to overthrow Putin to so many people. I mean, it's hard to fathom the degree of influence. And so I'd like to get your question. I know you've been analyzing this figure and the role he plays in a bigger picture for a long time. Is Epstein himself an evil genius behind everything, as some have been making it appear to be? Is he an asset for something else? Is he an asset for the Kremlin, as the BBC is telling me? Or what is going on?
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question, Matt. That's definitely, I think, on everyone's mind right now. Every day, I mean, we're talking about millions of documents that have been released. And so every day, I guess what gets referred casually as like weaponized autism, right? Just the internet at large, so many individual sleuths have been trying to put together there's so many documents, and it's a treasure trove. Every day there are 7, 8, 9 new major connections that are just not people are just abstractly putting together, but they're literally in these emails. For example, Mike Benz recently found that Epstein was able to get the CIA to relocate one of their main air bases so that he could make the contract for them. He was involved with Bill Gates in talking about pandemic stuff years before, like 2 or 3 years before COVID-19. He was involved in MIT's Media Lab taking control over Bitcoin. I mean, it's just so many different projects that are, what people call the so-called deep state, what's connected with so many different, you almost want to say conspiracy theories, but you could say conspiracy facts at this point, that Epstein was involved in. It's like he had his finger in everything. And in a number of things, he almost appears as a central player. And this is, in addition to that, the compromat for influence that he was running, his connection to Israel, very deeply connected to a number of Israeli officials and leaders in history, in recent history. His business partner, I guess, is that the word, Ghislaine Maxwell, and her siblings, all deeply involved with many of the biggest things going on in the world even today. He was with regard to cryptocurrency, not just Bitcoin, as people know, or people have found out, the Bitcoin had been used by ISIS in their internal funding mechanism and for transferring money and receiving funds mysteriously. Wonder where that came from. And he also wanted to make one for the region called the Sharia coin, or called Sharia, a Bitcoin specifically for funding nefarious projects in the region. So this guy was involved in so many things. And your question is a good one. Like, was he just a middleman? Was he just an operator? Or were some of these things in part his own brainchild? And I think that's actually what we are still piecing together. People in the OSINT community are trying to connect things that we've already known for some time. And it's just going down this rabbit hole, Matt. It's again, this is something that has dropped recently in the scheme of things, and we're only now seeing, Epstein goes much deeper than just human trafficking or Little St. James Island. It goes deeper than just the entertainment industry or entrapping politicians and using this influence. It connects to what years ago people were calling so-called Pizzagate, that scandal involving the Clintons, involving Tony Podesta, involving the Vanderbilt family as well. So this is just, again, paradigm shift, I think, is maybe a word that comes to mind in talking about all of this.
Mm-hmm. I've got a question. So it seems like, coming from the Republican side right now, you've got very diverse approaches on how to deal with the reveals, these millions of files that have gone public. You have Pam Bondi, who has given testimony saying, why is anybody paying attention to these Epstein files, to messaging from JP Morgan bankers to Ball account, that's supposed to receive tens of thousands of dollars, Baal being an ancient pagan deity that was famous for, demanding things like child sacrifice, which the Jewish prophets were radically opposed to in the Old Testament. But you have Pam Bondi coming out saying, like, why are we paying attention to that when the Dow Jones is doing so well? That's what we should be looking at is the stock markets. And on the other hand, you have, like, Thomas Representative Massey, who made the point that this is bigger than Watergate times 1,000. That this is like the biggest thing that we've ever seen as far as a major scandal tying together major forces controlling the U.S. political establishment and beyond, that will, make Watergate seem like a little walk in the park. So who do you think, like, why do you think there's such a divergence in opinion? What is Pam Bondi correct? Is because there is something to be said about that. Maybe I've heard some people say, well, there seems to be a lot of misinformation infused into the Epstein drops, that there's a lot of speculative things perhaps pertain to, the Trump profile and anonymous women claiming that Trump, was doing terrible things to them, but there's not a lot of evidence. There's speculation that maybe this is part of the Me Too operation, that there isn't much behind it. So maybe Pam Bondi is perhaps trying to make a point that there's fakery in there, or is she running cover for the thing? And is Thomas Massey more correct in his position to say, no, this is actually bigger than Watergate? There's something real going on here. What's your take on cutting through the misinformation?
Yeah, I think, well, just on the face of it, Thomas Massey is right. This is 1,000 times, 10,000 times a universe bigger than Watergate, in terms of its depth, in terms of its potential implication, in terms of its actual implication. On the other hand, what we are seeing with Bondi is she's doing her role in what Trump's strategy has been in all of this. And if you go back to the beginning of this term, they hit the ground running, talking about, yeah, we're going to do D-class on Epstein. And Bondi went through this kind of drama with some very questionable controlled, probably APAC approved $7,000 a post influencers to hold these little stupid binders that said, D-class part 1. And then they seemed to back off of that approach. And then they started to act like Epstein was never what Trump voters were interested in, that Epstein was just this weird thing that Democrats were fixated on. And they did this very interesting reversal where they seem to have trolled the Democrat establishment and Blue Anon influencers into making Epstein release their issue. And by doing so, Trump was able to place a distance between himself and that, so that, well, let's just play it the other way. And so that will make sense. Had he just gone with track 1 that we saw at the beginning of this term a year ago, you would have had all the pushback from the Democrats saying that Trump was weaponizing this to go after his political opponents, that Epstein was a hoax. And I mean, that's what Democrats and neocons were saying years ago during Trump's first term, and were saying during the entire time of the Biden administration. So what we're seeing with Bondi is really weird, Matt, because on the one hand, verbally, officially, she's casting aspersions on Epstein and what this whole thing is about. But in reality, she's the one that has dropped these, right? So everything that we're talking about today is a product of Bondi's drop. So we can't lose track of that really obvious fact. It's easy to lose track of that because her messaging has been precisely the opposite of what in fact they have done with this. Also interesting is that the assistant AG came out in front of the public right as these dropped a week ago and said, this is about half of them, and the other half we're not releasing because these are active investigations leading to potential prosecutions. And people understand, if they have some sense of how the legal system works, you can't disclose to the public the evidence that's going to be used in a trial, for example, or something else. And I take a different approach. I don't know that strategically that, trials, like think about, we're talking about the American system. You have so many judges compromised. What is more powerful than judges handing out some convictions that probably won't go that way, might not even, you would have issues of certiorari, you would have issues of the legal process itself, jury contamination. Everyone has an opinion about this. There's no one who doesn't have an opinion about Epstein. I don't even know how you would do a jury trial in many ways, but releasing everything would absolutely negate how evidence works in a legal procedure. And one of the things we have to keep in mind is, like, when a person does get accused, it's only after the charges are filed and after they've been accused that the discovery process starts, and then they have access to those things that they're being charged with. Otherwise, they could be involved in destruction of evidence. They're going to get their story together before charges are filed. So just people who understand the legal process understand why you can't release things that are going to be used in legal proceedings. But I think that, more realistically, this is really just about blackmail and who controls the blackmail. Like, in other words, this is compromise that Epstein and a whole faction of power were using for leverage. And now the blackmail has a new master, so to speak, and that master is Trump. So, and the way that blackmail works is, well, if you let it all out, then you don't get to use it. I mean, blackmail has an ongoing utility, provided that the threat is there, that if you don't do what I want you to do, then I'm going to release it. But there's much more utility in this group getting that group to do what they want them to do than going through the charade of a potentially problematic legal process. Again, judges, courts, who appointed these judges? I mean, how many Obama, et cetera, Biden, et cetera, appointed judges might be in these different federal district courts? So it's a very interesting arrangement. I think your questions are excellent. And I think that those are the things that people are asking right now.
No, thank you. I guess as far as the strategic relevance of that moment, that these files were made public and then promptly, they disappeared from the White House website, but they were out there long enough that people, copied them all, paid attention, had enough chance to save the information. The timing seems odd. I know a lot of commentators that I've been making in the Middle East, especially around Iran. It's been really a roller coaster ride over the past several months. The 12-day, whatever that weird 12-day war was last year. But you had these mass protests breaking out. Early January, you had Scott Bessent, bragging about what a great job the U.S. The U.S. has done at crippling the Iranian economy and forcing scarcity and people to turn into a pressure cooker. And there's a lot of that going on. And then there's positioning of certain strike groups in and around or nearby Iran, and discussion again of whether Israel is going to go launch full hog into it or wait for the U.S. to strike and do some sort of another decapitation operation. There's so much tension, and so some people have been speculating that the release of the Epstein drops had something to do with that, whether it was to try to stop Trump from doing something, or whether it was from Benjamin Netanyahu's people releasing the stuff in order to threaten Trump's people into going harder, or was this, as I think you've been alluding to, something more on Trump's side as a controlled drop for another reason? So how do you relate that to the escalation of tensions in the Middle East and specifically
right?
Iran?
I mean, again, so it was Trump's people that released all of these. And so once we have once we understand that part, then I think a lot of other pieces make sense. So this didn't happen despite Trump. This doesn't subvert Trump. Like, Trump released these, and what was released is what Trump wanted released. So when you look at the protests in Iran, which the CIA and Mossad were backing, according to many reports and analysts at the beginning last month, timing is everything. And what was happening in terms of like what would be needed to actually attack Iran, what you would need to be synchronized would be the entire full necessary strike force of naval assets, U.S. naval assets, to support an attack on Iran while the protests were at their apex. So the fact of these things alone doesn't tell us what the real intent was. In fact, the timing of these, or rather the mistiming and the mismatch of coordination, really tells you, I think, what was intended. So in my point of view is that they had withdrawn significant amount of the naval assets from the region, both the Persian Gulf and the Eastern Mediterranean, and they relocated them in Puerto Rico for a regime change operation in Venezuela that also didn't really happen. And they didn't use all those assets to do anything on Venezuela. They did do something. They took Maduro. A lot of questions surrounding that. But you have Delcy Rodriguez now in power, and Trump's people are saying she's great, she's wonderful, she's a 10 out of 10. And that is the so-called Chavista regime. Like these are the Bolivarian revolutionaries. Many people on the inside talk about actually Delcy was closer politically to Hugo Chavez than Maduro was. So now all those assets were in the Caribbean when you would have needed them to be in the Persian Gulf or the Eastern Mediterranean. So the fact that there were these protests, what all that really did was, it was like having the fireworks show at the wrong time. So, you know, all of these assets are now burned up. They're arrested. The Iranian intelligence have gone and made, you know, thousands and thousands of arrests. Those people are not getting out of jail soon, if they're even alive. So you're not going to have a regime change operation without revolutionaries inside the country. That ring now is by and large broken up. And so whatever they do moving forward might be as effective as what we saw during the end of the 12-day war. So in context of the Epstein stuff, I think it's important that people have to understand that that politics is not representative of lawsuits. Politics is not representative of what judges or juries think or do, or what prosecutors charge. Politics is a reflection of mass consciousness. It's soft power, and mass consciousness is driven by these huge paradigm shifting events where it's like the song Everybody Knows, you know, everybody knows. And everybody knows right now what actually, now people are, this is a second great awakening that is occurring right now. So whether you're more Democrat leaning, more Republican leaning, more libertarian, more socialist, anyone that's paying attention is very clear right now that the United States had a very, very messed up relationship with Israel, that with eugenics, with Bill Gates, with Bitcoin, with, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And Epstein is symbolic, and he's like the central figure that all of these stories connect to. And you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube, right? In other words, there's no going back. We've crossed the point of no return. So this is about mass consciousness and consciousness formation, right? This is about what everybody knows to be true. And the consequences of that politically, socially, I mean, what was the latest one? I just saw yesterday that you had one of the major attorneys, I'm trying to remember her name, from a huge banking firm, was trying
from Goldman Sachs, who had to resign, right?
Yeah, Goldman Sachs. I was thinking, you know, Chase, Citibank, Goldman Sachs with John Brennan, CIA director John Brennan, and Epstein. So now you've got CIA Epstein, we know Mossad Epstein, and this, you can't, this, you know, you can take that stuff off some government website, but like you said, people already have pulled all that stuff off. On the issue of hoaxes, yeah, there's going to be a lot of fake stuff in there, not because there are fake things, not because there are real things, fake things being presented as real, but we're talking about everything, all this tangential stuff that FBI, etc., were collecting for years on Epstein, and it includes fake news about it. It includes a lot of rumors and gossip, because anything of interest is an investigation. So everything is of investigative value, And so when you drop all this stuff that was in their files, it's going to include things that the investigators themselves knew were, you know, secondary information or fakes or rumors or not authentic or whatever. And there are other dimensions to this as well, because this is all coming out right on the precipice, right in the age of AI generated video, AI generated images. It reminds one very much of when the so-called Pizzagate scandal was just coming out to light, and at that same time, culturally, we had this big push, this big move to normalize PDF philia, and it was, you know, it happened at the same time. They started calling people minor attracted people, and this was happening right at, you know, this was about 9 years ago, 10 years ago. I think you and I talked about this years ago at the time. You know, what the impact of it was, how real was it, what was going on with, you know, Comet Pizza and the ping pong place over there in Washington, D.C.
Ping pong and, yeah.
Remember that? Yeah. And then it was right at that time that you had this big push in mainstream media to normalize what was going on there. And I think that failed. You know, that's like a, you know, a 99-1 issue. It's not even a 90-10 issue. Like, no one is in favor of that, right?
Yeah. Well, ironically, just on that point, you know, many of those journalists, those paid hacks were assigned to debunk the whole conspiracy, all of the conspiracy narratives around Pizzagate. There's an incredibly high number. There's like 6 major figures who are journalists working to debunk the actual Pizzagate story around it being tied to a pedophilia ring deeply embedded inside of Washington, D.C. And these 6 journalists, I forget their names off the top of my head, but people I'm sure can Google it, were all subsequently convicted of pedophilia themselves, that they were themselves guilty of participating in varying degrees with pedophilia rings. Some very close friends of one was a very close friend of the pedestrian. I mean, things, as much as they've been trying to brush the stuff under the rug, there's a lot of dirty monsters that have been just accumulating under this bulbous rug now that are, the rug's not big enough. It's coming out. So that's interesting there. Back to the question of Iran. So Trump has recently said here, I'll just play a little 20-second clip and then juxtapose it with something Lindsey Graham has done at the Munich Security Conference. So Trump has made a comment that I think is an interesting one.
He said inside that the Iranian nuclear sites have been totally obliterated. What's left to go after?
Well, you could get whatever the dust is down there. That's really the least of the mission. If we do it, that would be the least of the mission. But we, you know, probably grab whatever's left. It has been obliterated, as you know.
So on the one hand, Trump is just making a little cheeky comment on like, well, what do you do after if there's a strike on Iran, everything's destroyed. What do you do? It doesn't seem like Trump is all that enthusiastic in that very, very short clip with the idea of striking Iran. It seems like he might be making a little tongue in cheek at Netanyahu and company, who have been, you know, drooling for that idea. And then on the other hand, you have Lindsey Graham going to the Munich Security Conference, waving this, you know, the flag of the old Iranian regime with the lion on it, championing his boy Reza Pahlavi Jr., whatever, who's the claimant to the throne of the post at whole Iran. And it seems like these are two, again, very different views on how to approach Iran. There does seem to be a need or a desire to some form of a deal. Whether Iran is interested in that doesn't seem like, at least so far. It seems like it's more threats against Iran, and Iran has not really found the type of respect that they're looking for, sit down and actually make and strike a nuclear deal. But it still seems like there's an openness within the Iranian leadership. It seems like there's an openness that Trump is not lying when he says he would like a deal. But then you have Lindsey Graham and many others within the U.S. establishment from the left and from the right who would like rather to see that regime change operation go full hog and get their Reza Pahlavi kid, instated as their boy in the Middle East. I'm sure Netanyahu would like that too. What's your take? Do you think that that this is still as much of a danger today to get this Iranian regime change and the strike that would entail, or that would provoke that regime change, or do you think that Reza Shah Pahlavi, whatever, Jr., is he really just like all used up and people are just like flowing on delusion at this point, and it's already been flushed in reality?
I think it's the latter. I think it's the latter. The pretender to the non-existent throne of Iran, he's 2 times faked, right? He's a pretender to a throne that doesn't exist. He's not serious. He's not a serious person. They don't have an alternative structure. And I think that is the most important thing to understand in this, is that the United States and Russia are in very serious rapprochement talks, and you can talk about the redistribution or recarving up of the world and spheres of influence. I will tell you what is completely unacceptable to Russia is to have a failed state in Iran. So what am I saying with this? Well, there is no alternative structure or way to have a regime change in Iran. You could have a total and devastating war on Iran. I think they would also, in the process of being devastated, also succeed at eliminating any infrastructure and almost every building in Israel, by the way. So it would come at that cost. And Israel is the only country pushing for this level of action on Iran. And there's no government in waiting or alternative security structure that can come into power in Iran. So, and Israel knows that. And Israel's aim is to create a failed state in, what you would then call the former Iran. There's no real alternative to have a friendly Iran that is a country, because what we have learned, and the difference between geopolitics and rhetoric, is an understanding that oftentimes the main issue is that there is a physical state there. Like, the issue is not the ideology of the state, it's that there is a state. You can look at, for example, Russia, right? During the Cold War, they tried to make it sound like this was an ideological issue, like they're communists. We need to take the communists out, and then we can have good relations with Russia. No, the problem is that Russia exists as a state, as a geopolitical entity. The collective West would like to break that up into 14 different states. And the truth is that while they have some plans for that, the story that would emerge along the way would be the Yeltsin period times 1,000. It would be a failed state. You have, the resurgence of ISIS in Chechnya, Dagestan, the Caucasus would be, it would be a failed state. Likewise, the problem with Iran is not that, from the point of view of neocons and the Israeli authorities, is not that, there's an Islamic Republic. That's not the issue. The issue is that they're a strong state, they exist, they have infrastructure, they have 90-something million people. That's the issue.
Yep.
So there's no realistic plan to change that government, and everyone knows that. And Trump is not in favor of creating a failed state in Iran. So ergo, no regime change, because regime change is not possible, but no moves masked or cloaked as regime change. That's why they, you can say, oh, they brought Starlink in and they did all these things. Yes, but without military backup, it's like when Kennedy gave the green light to the Bay of Pigs, but refused to provide air support. And by refusing to provide air support, he actually betrayed the effort of the Bay of Pigs invasion, right? Like he had been pushed to approving that part of it, but he had control over the military, and he did not want to create this confrontation, a broader, devolution and conflict in Cuba, right? So that's very similar to, well, with Venezuela as well, but that's very similar to what we're seeing with Iran. So the protest, fine. Starlink, fine. That actually helped the Iranian authorities at a great cost to the loss of their police and some civilians in the thousands, but they've rounded up most of these people. So if you were to now bomb Iran, you're not going to have a coordinated uprising because those fireworks have already been shot. So the timing of these things is more important than the rhetoric.
That's true. Yeah, and it's given them time. I know that it's been revealed now that enough forensics have been done that a number of Israeli military grade bullets were found in the bodies of children in Iran. A lot is very important to reveal like some of the hidden hands behind that regime change effort, which is, like you said, caused a lot of the fireworks to go off right before they were supposed to. And now if they were going to provoke a more serious regime change, they have a lot less to work with as far as provocateurs and others who have been flushed out. That's a very good point. On the issue geoeconomically speaking, Iran is also a key artery for both the east-west Silk Road, especially the southern branch of the Silk Road. You know, there's a rail line stretching from the Pacific and China all the way down into Iran that could feasibly be an entry point to a number of Middle Eastern states as part of the Southern Silk Road operation, as well as the international north-south transportation corridor stretching from the north of Russia all the way down through the Caspian Sea region, through the both on the eastern and western sides of that. Azerbaijan would be a key one, Armenia, as well as on the opposite side. So you have that all the way down to Iran and then into India. So there's these key international corridors. Iran's a key player within that. You have major mutual security pacts that were recently signed between China, Russia, and Iran. Another aspect of that, on top of the energy and transport corridors. But then you have on the opposite, I know that we've heard many U.S. establishment figures, including Trump, who have asserted their disapproval to the Belt and Road Initiative as being something that could challenge the U.S. sort of system, what have you. Additionally, the international north-south transportation corridor could feasibly, I've heard a lot of analysts describe how it could be threatened by U.S. agreements in Azerbaijan with Aliyev, but also with in Armenia. There's new U.S. Security and well, these might be more economic and energy deals, but definitely the U.S. seems to be under strategic control of the Zangezur corridor, this certain very important stretch of rail and other roads and other things stretching between the Caspian and Europe that could feasibly block off the development or the success of this like 9,000 kilometer north-south corridor. Where do you see that? Do you see that? Do you think that there is as much of a threat to these international corridors as some are saying, or do you think that it's more safe and that U.S. Involvement in Azerbaijan, Armenia, and what have you are actually more helpful to the development of these corridors?
Yeah. Whenever I look at what Trump is saying, I have to compare that to what he does. And then I have to compare that to the things that happen anyway, despite what he said, and then how he actually responds to that. So Trump is a really interesting person because he's more like track what he does more than what he says. I think you're talking about the North-South corridor. What's interesting about this is that what you IMEC project from India to Europe as India's kind of answer to China's Belt and Road. Forget that India is part of BRICS, and Trump in the United States. And you can look at the things that Marco Rubio said the other day about, or earlier yesterday, depending on where you are, that the era of American unipolar hegemony is over. The post-Cold War. This is the same thing that Blinken said after the failed Ukrainian counteroffensive into Zaporozhye a couple of years ago. That world is gone. This is a new era of geopolitics, and the United States needs to work with its partners in the world to really renegotiate what the future looks like. How can we live in a world of co-prosperity? This is about rising multipolarity. And so I do think that, with Armenia and, for example, some of these corridors, and with Azerbaijan, the United States can go in and do this. It gives themselves some leverage in projects that are going to involve Russia in the end. So that's very interesting on that point. But coming back to Epstein, because this is also about multipolarity. Like we were just saying that Epstein, these emails, there's like a finger in everything. He was in emails with Peter Thiel, and Epstein was explaining to Thiel, globalization's not the way of the future. Like multipolarity is the way of the future. Like that's what Epstein is saying, which is he was urging Thiel to see that globalization is not the way forward. So very interesting. I mean, Epstein was having long philosophical conversations with Noam Chomsky about socialism, right? This is someone that had different interests. He's somebody. Epstein, in many ways, is somebody that if he wasn't,
he was talking about. He was talking to Steve Bannon apparently too about setting up a populist third party in the United States, and infiltrating the Vatican to overthrow Pope Francis. Like very, very, very strange degrees of discourse going on here with the unexpected.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah. With Thiel, they were talking about multipolarity, and so this shows that the Western elites have knowledge about these questions, and they have a lot. They have skin in game. They have the most skin in game in many ways, and so it goes to show you that what is holding back a whole section of the Western oligarchy isn't that they don't know the writing on the wall. It's that they are invested in relationships that are irretractable and untangleable. So they are locked in to relationships that they can't unwind despite seeing the writing on the wall. Those who can unwind or repivot, and it looks like Peter Thiel took Epstein's advice and has basically lined up his political chips against globalization, against globalism, and in the direction of what's the United States angle going to be in this rising multipolarity. So it really shows, it gives you insight into the mechanics of the inter-elite conflict in the United States. And you can see that there's people that have the flexibility because they are in new industries, so they have the flexibility. But people that are stuck in old models, in the ones that are connected to the foundations of the third industrial revolution, so to speak. The ones that are baked in to transatlantic and City of London banking structures, they can't disinvest. Like, they can see that it's not going to work, so they just can keep talking their book, kicking the can down the road, getting Zelensky to say we're never going to give up any part of Ukraine, so they don't lose all that investment in Ukraine, even though they've already lost it. They have to keep evergreening this stuff. They have to keep talking their book. They have to keep this mythology that Zelensky can get this territory back. So, but they know that it can't happen. But when they're called to account, like when they're basically forced to market the real value of actual assets versus hypothetical things that they can get in the future, if that comes, and it may come soon, that's going to be a huge crash and a new crisis economically that will be the final undoing of globalization and transatlanticism. It could be a huge takedown, so to speak, in the parlance, as they say, of a lot of these City of London banks. They're too big to fail in many ways. They're too big to fail, Matt. But the relationships and the global architecture, the global geoeconomic architecture, is in the process of revolutionizing right now as we speak. It's fascinating that Epstein and all these things connect. We can talk about Iran, we can talk about the Ukraine, we can talk about Bitcoin, we can talk about the CIA and Brennan, we can talk about a third party and populism, we can talk about Noam Chomsky in Palestine, we can talk about the Mossad, like we can talk about human trafficking, we can talk about adrenochrome and Pizzagate. It all applies to Epstein.
I guess that's what's sort of disturbing to me a little bit, is the adaptability of certain factions of this parasite. Like the fact even that Epstein was apparently at the very, very foundations of the development of 4chan back in 2012. Right. And you had the whole Chicada 3301 operation that led into QAnon. The fact that guy is already at the very heart and foundation of that, on top of being part of these ball child, terrible sacrificing networks, it bothers me enormously to see the intersection of these different aspects of the thing in that form. Or you hear of the head of Palantir UK being Sir Oswald Mosley's grandson, Louis Mosley, who's the head of that of all the people in the world, you got the guy who's gonna be the British Nazi. His grandson, of all people in the world, is heading Palantir UK. I'm like, I don't like that. But that being said, reality is still present. Like, there is this truth above the narratives, above the human perception. This force this type of adaptability, and one can only hope that if there is a higher desire to survive and to reject the agenda of the feudal restorationists that had, they gamed out the whole end of history program back in, decades and decades ago. They thought they were going to celebrate that in '92 when the Soviet Union collapsed. That program doesn't seem to be applicable if they want to maintain any relevance in the new world. They have to make higher adjustments and modifications of their thinking, which might create a space for humanity to ultimately thrive and win out at the end of the day. So that does give us something to work with, much more so than the former, as you called it, the blue and on worldview, which was more hegemonic under the days of Biden and Obama. But let me transition just a little bit, because I want to get your thoughts on the Americas. And I got one little video clip of Maria Machado. I'm gonna play that video clip, and maybe two video. I'll play two video clips of Machado, and then get your thoughts. So the first one is gonna follow here. Very quick statement. statement by Machado.
What role
from a
would
few
you
weeks
want
ago.
in a future Venezuelan government? Because even President Trump says you may have a role in the future. Would you run for president?
I will be president when the time comes. But it doesn't matter. That should be decided in elections by the Venezuelan people. I wasn't allowed to run in the last election, as we mentioned before, because Maduro was afraid to run in against me. And he thought Edmundo was not a threat because nobody knew who he was. And in less than 3 months, we managed to put the whole country supporting him because this is a matter of freedom.
The eyes, eh? It's all in the eyes. Crazed eyes. So, but the level of confidence of this woman that I will be president is just a question.
The eyes,
of when.
Pico, they never lie.
That I'd like to get your thoughts on that, but before. No, never. So there's a level of confidence that she's pushing out there. The other thing that she just said, I think this is a video from like yesterday, where she's threatening regime change now in
One,
Cuba
we
and Nicaragua.
dismantle
It's 20
the
seconds.
regime, the criminal regime in Venezuela. Cuba will be next. Nicaragua will follow. For the first time in history, we will have the Americas free of communism and dictatorship. This is huge regarding, the contribution to humanity.
She looks like the Joker. She looks like Heath Ledger.
It's serious, eh? Like you don't have to do CGI there. It's
No.
It's too close. So you got this woman, this thing that's like being put out there to put out this messaging. Now, it does seem that there's a certain degree of reality backing up some of these wild claims she's making. The Mexican government has put a halt on exporting oil and energy exports to Cuba to take them off. There's a lot of pressure on many other nations of the world to cut off all support, especially providing energy to Cuba. It does kind of seem to me that there is an acceleration in play for a takeover of Cuba. Don't know about Nicaragua so much, or some of the threats being made to other countries. Maybe I know Gustavo Petro had a meeting with Trump that might have like released some of the tension that people thought was being built up around the idea of Petro being overthrown. But Cuba does seem to be a big one on the list. What do you think? Is she completely out to lunch here, or is there some degree of truth to what she's saying about the expansion and takeover of these other Latin American countries?
I think that we could see in Cuba something similar to what we saw in Venezuela. I think that the main problem, we have to think not ideologically, but we have to think in terms of where Trump stands in relationship to the old guard in the United States. So the old guard in the United States, the Uniparty, Hillary Clinton's assets in Latin America, whether you're talking about Juan Guaido in Venezuela or Machado, whether you're talking about the Soros-backed opposition in Cuba and the development of like these alternatives to Twitter. There was a woman whose name I can't recall right now, but they were promoting her some years ago as like the Machado for Cuba. The problem, Matt, is that the Brennan and Pompeo and Bolton and the Clintons, we might think of these like, well, those are Democrats and those are Republicans. No, this was a uniparty, and they agreed on all these intelligence structures. So all of the alternative structures that the United States could conceivably put into power in Latin American countries are subordinate to structures that have been trying to remove Trump from power in the United States. So why would he do that? And in addition, those structures, alternative structures that could come in the wake of real regime change in Latin American countries, the Mossad also has their hands all over it, right? So like, for example, Machado works for Netanyahu, right? Her party, the Vente party, has the main agreement with the Likud party. And that agreement is across energy, security, in other words, oil from Venezuela to Israel. And this would allow Netanyahu to break the agreement on the Gaza peace plan, which is a UN Security Council resolution. And Netanyahu is the one that is trying to subvert peace in Gaza. Trump needs buy-in from the Qataris, from the Emiratis, from the Saudis. They have to shoulder like 2/3 to 3/4 of the investment capital to make Gaza redevelopment happen. And Israel had a totally different plan. They wanted to keep Gaza as a perpetual, as what you had seen leading up to October several years ago. They wanted to keep this open air prison of hopelessness and what Jimmy Carter described as an apartheid, and I think worse than apartheid. And then the genocide, I would call it, from October 7 onward. Their policy was to ethnically cleanse the indigenous Gazans, the Palestinians, from that region and make it all Israel. And that was not the plan that either Trump or Kushner or others were able to make with more important players than Israel. Like, Israel's kind of a liability, and they're not holding the dollar together like Saudi Arabia is holding the dollar together, right? So this is what's needed, and these all connect. And when we understand that Machado is a Netanyahu, Bolton, Pompeo, Elliot Abrams puppet, why would Trump install someone that would empower the team and give that team extra leverage that's been trying to impeach him since 2019 and throw him in jail when, during the time that Biden was president? That makes no sense strategically. It makes more sense to be friends with Kim Jong-un in North Korea, or with Xi Jinping in China, or with the communist government in Venezuela. It seems counterintuitive ideologically if you listen to what Trump says, but if you actually map out the relationships and how he's actually able to do things and how he does things in other parts of the world, then why would he empower the so-called deep state that is trying to undermine him in important resource countries like Venezuela? It makes no sense. And you saw there was fake news from Bloomberg the other day that the Venezuelan government was going to send oil to Israel. Fake news, right? They keep trying this fake news stuff, and the Venezuelan government had to make a press release specifically to address Bloomberg's egregious 1 millionth instance of fake news about this. So it's Machado. If Machado gets in there, then that means that Trump has lost. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's not in Trump's playbook. I'm sure there's a contingency for if that has to happen, but it's definitely far from preferred. They've been fighting that position. Why? Because if Israel had access to Venezuelan oil, then they wouldn't need Egypt, they wouldn't need Azerbaijan, they wouldn't need Kazakhstan. And that's very unstable, right? So Israel gets 40 to 45% of its oil from Kazakhstan, and they get another 40 to 45% from Azerbaijan, and they get 10% from Brazil, and they get 3 to 5% from Congo Brazzaville. Now, they aren't going to do very much with that 3 to 5% from Congo Brazzaville. All those other countries are politically sensitive. They recently made a deal with Chevron through Egypt, Israel did, to get oil. We're talking about gasoline, for cars, regular oil, gas. But if Israel violates the accord, violates the peace agreement. And remind you, Trump has just announced phase 2 of the peace agreement, where you actually create a military police structure, and the IDF has to withdraw to the second withdrawal line. So now it's like from the yellow line to the blue line or whatever, or the yellow line to the red line, right? Finally, they have to withdraw from all of Gaza by the end of this process. So this is not going to how the plan that Netanyahu had been fighting for. Netanyahu is losing. Netanyahu keeps harassing Trump. Netanyahu keeps showing up in Washington. And it was, Matt, it was totally telltale. His last visit, like a few days ago, he did a Zelensky. He shows up, Matt, he shows up uninvited. How do we know he was uninvited? Because they brought their own red carpet, and the people that saluted him and welcomed him were the pilots of his own plane. And the people on the other side were his own bodyguards. And they were like this. It's like, that's not how that's supposed to go. It's supposed to be the welcoming country that welcomes you, like not your own fucking flight attendants and shit. So, excuse my French. So that, and Zelensky had done that like some months ago, you recall. We already knew how that meeting was going to go. We already knew how that meeting was going to go. And then Trump confirmed. Netanyahu didn't get his war on Iran. We insist on negotiations with Iran. Iran is probably going to wind up with nuclear power. That is a series of civilian nuclear generating facilities that are a Russian subsidiary, which on the Russian side, Americans are invested in. So I think the Americans are going to invest in Iranian nuclear power under the present Iranian regime through a Russian subsidiary operating in Iran.
Is this part of the Dmitriev plan that we've heard so much about, or is this already in play as far as U.S.-Russian nuclear cooperation in play right now?
That's what it looks like. Yes,
that's what it's already. Like, yeah. Well, that's very interesting. So would that also involve the Russians processing spent fuel?
Yeah. So there's
for
two,
Iran and then sending it back, like the Russians offered before the 12-day war.
There's two ways that can go. There is a present generation that requires that the uranium requires zero enrichment. There's a couple nuclear power plants in Canada right now that operate on a present generation that requires zero enrichment. So there's that. It could be that the Iranians can enrich their own up to 3% or 5%. A lot of things are possible. It looks like the Russians are on board with Iran should not have nukes. Many people, including myself, have said, we hope the Iranians secretly have a program only to prevent Israel from doing the unthinkable. But if that is not what is going to happen, and if Israel's been marginalized, and if Israel doesn't have any support from anyone on an attack on Iran, then maybe it makes sense that the Iranians themselves have committed to no nuclear weapons already. So the issue of enrichment kind of becomes secondary, although it is interesting that the Iranians enriched to 60, 70% or thereabouts prior, during the time that JCPOA was in its kind of different fits and false starts during the Obama period, like 9-10 years ago. Would have been 8 years ago. But gosh, what year are we in? Oh my God. Anyway, JCPOA and Obama, people remember that the Iranians were doing the stuff that as the thing was.
Yeah, that was 2016. Yeah, that was 10 years ago. Yeah.
They enriched. They kept announcing, we've enriched to 40%, we've enriched to 50%, we've enriched to 60%. So they enriched like 8 or 9 tons to over 60 or almost 70%. You need like 90% to produce a nuclear weapon that we're aware of, but they could also be researching a different type of nuclear weapon that requires, just 60, 70%. I don't know. I'm not a nuclear physicist, but I do know that they have nuclear physicists, and that's the point. And they didn't get rid of all of the tonnage of that. They gave to Russia. Actually, that was so interesting about the deals, that Russia took custody of like 7 of those 8 tons, but the Iranians retained a ton, and that ton was thought to be at either Isfahan or Fordo, which Trump did not actually attack. And we know that for a number of reasons. Number one, the Maxar satellite imagery does not justify that an attack happened. In fact, I can send it to you right now if you want to throw it up. I think this is it. Yes. On I put it there in your okay.
Oh, in the chats, comments.
Yes.
I actually don't see it.
There it is.
Oh, is this on Telegram?
Yeah.
It's on Telegram.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if you can pull it over.
I actually can't. I'm using a computer that doesn't allow me to download Telegram. I can't access my Telegram from this computer, unfortunately, so I can't.
Oh, maybe I can just.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Let me see.
If you share it, I mean, if you share the screen, I could present it publicly if you want.
Yeah. Can I screen share it, or
if you go to the go to the screen share option on StreamYard, and if you click on your image, it's there's a little button that has a screen with a plus sign in the middle of it. And
I got it up.
Yeah, there you go. And then I could just add it to stage, which is right now. Here we are.
Okay. All right. So Isfahan is a giant mountain, and the nuclear facility is like a mile deep or half a mile deep. Do you see those, like, looks like a couple of blackheads or like acne on the top of the mountain there on the left? I know.
Yeah.
Oh, so
yeah,
small.
The 3 little dots.
Okay.
There.
That's supposedly
blackheads.
where the bunker busters hit.
Yeah.
Like, so you can see the size of the entrance facility over there on the right. That looks to be about 100 to 150 meters long by maybe 40 meters wide. You can see the size of the road. So you can see the width of the road, and you can see the size of, it looks like 4 to 5 different craters that are just very small. Those are commensurate with Tomahawk strikes. So it looks like they did use Tomahawks on the surface of the building, but what you did not have is several sorties of, B-class bombers dropping, 30,000 pound bunkers. And the story that they told was that, like, it was like in Star Wars where they dropped the bomb immediately down the hatch, and like that's what destroyed the Death Star. Like that perfect direct hit, and no one believes that, and that's not what you see. Like, you'd have to not believe your own lying eyes to believe that it was obliterated. So yeah, Trump lies. Trump's a liar. I always say, hey, if I was in the park with my kids and a man with a knife ran up and I was indisposed, like I couldn't defend myself, and he says, hey, which way did those kids run? I'm going to lie, Matt. I'm going to be a liar too. I'm going to say that my kids went that way. Okay. Trump lied and said that he destroyed Iran's nuclear facility, and there's no way that he did. But that's what ended the 12-day war. And that's why every time he makes reference to, oh yeah, it's obliterated, it's like, that's to keep Netanyahu off. Like that's to keep Israel at bay. But this is not a destroyed nuclear facility at the mountain at Fordo.
No.
Very obviously. Like, that's just, So
I guess on the very last question I'll throw at you. Oh yeah, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so for the last question, just because we usually keep this for about an hour, but this is very important material, so I do appreciate you giving the time to go a little beyond our usual time frame. On the board of peace, it does seem that, well, I'd like to get your thoughts on that. Like, what I know that more recently, 8 new members were announced: Egypt, Pakistan, Jordan, the UAE, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar were announced as members of the Board of Peace. They've accepted being a part of this thing. Do you see this thing currently moving in a good direction that could provide a resolution to the problems, multi-generational problems faced by the people of Palestine and what have you? And also, do you see this, as some are saying, as the foundations of a substitution to the UN structure, or something that would be a part of the UN as another regional entity that could provide more space for more common sense dialogue? Or do you see this as kind of a boondoggle tied to BlackRock control grids of, 15-minute Freedom City reconstructions in the Gaza for Riviera thing, the way others are saying? So how do you think about the Gaza Board of Peace right now and these different scenarios for it?
I think it could be all of those things that you mentioned. I think if there's like an all of the above option, I would go for all of the above, but it doesn't have to be one or the other, obviously. It's interesting because the Board of Peace seems to grow out of the backers of the Gaza redevelopment plan, but then it seems to involve countries that are not regional, and then it kind of goes in the abstraction, and it's one of those things that, for me, messaging and optics kind of are strange because it's a little too Trump centric, and that I don't see why. Like, what are the rules of it? Like, how does it work? The Russians are being very polite about it. I don't know if they're going to get on board with it. Is this something that Trump or the American president has the power to dissolve at will, or to decide who's on it? Because if that's the case, then it's going to be really limited. You see, it's going to be really limited to maybe working out some of the investment stuff or the stability for Gaza. But I think one thing for sure is that, the structure of the UN is absolutely a product of the post-World War II order. And we are now like several orders in terms of global paradigms beyond the end of World War II. Like, the UN fits in post-World War II. And then when you get to the post-Soviet period and the period of American unipolar hegemony, like from the 90s, which ended by American accounts, which ended like in 2020, that already the foundations of how international law was understood, or the potency or efficacy of the Security Council was understood, all seem to be kind of eroded from really, when you talk about Tony Blair's Chicago Doctrine, R2P, the US war on Iraq, the US war on Yugoslavia. Those were real paradigm killers. Those totally disrupted how the post-World War II order was understood. So I don't, Lavrov has spoken to structural problems in the UN. Lavrov has spoken to the issue of whether UN Security Council resolutions from decades ago can really still be implemented, which I think was disheartening for some people, because we do know that there are older UN Security Council resolutions on Palestine. And I think everyone on planet Earth right now, except for like the United States officially, like at the UN, Guam, Micronesia, I think almost everyone is on board with a Palestinian state. if this board of peace can take us in that direction, then good. But it's hard to think of it as something that could supplant the United Nations, while recognizing that there are some, we're living in a period of interregnum, Matt. So I think all those things that you said could be true. I'm sorry if that's not like the best answer, but it's really no. For me, it's kind of ridiculous. Like for me, like Trump announcing a board of peace and that like he's in charge of it is kind of mismatched with the actual position of the United States in the world, which is like, this would have to be something coming from China and Russia and the United States. And if it was like from all of them, then I think it could have something. But if it's just like in Trump's mind or something, then no.
No, I think that part of this transition in that all of society is experiencing, whether this is going to turn out for the better or for the worse in the long run, still remains to be seen. But we have to, I think, adopt a method of dynamic thinking that encapsulates nuance, holding multiple hypotheses about things we don't fully have all of the facts to in our minds at the same time. Now, that doesn't mean we treat all things as equally true, but we have to be able to have recognition of where we have certainty and where we don't. And that's, I think, a big problem that I encounter, that I think I and many people watching the show get frustrated with, is that, especially amongst many geopolitical commentators who mean well, that we hear a lot of commentators on all parts of the internet circuit. There's an overuse of the language of absolute certainty, which betrays the actual ignorance that these people have, whether they have TDS or whether they are white pill to the hopium extreme or whatever. There's this absolutist language that really is, I think, problematic and incompetent. And I think what you've done by just introducing a nuanced way of approaching the question of hypothesizing what's behind the policies that are shaping our future is a very important idea. And just appreciating that there is natural law, there's a natural, truthful order to the universe, and that human beings, when we're at our best, when we're at our most natural, we are adherent to that order in thought and action. When we are not fit to survive, we are detached from it. We get into more of a Malthusian dynamic. We start cannibalizing young, and things don't go well. And that's the case of all human history. From all civilizations, we could see the same patterns erupt. So to the degree that we have that philosophical foundation and we approach analysis, I think we're in a good place. And I thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts about the world situation, especially this weird thing called Epstein. So there's going to be a lot more digging, a lot more threads to pull in the weeks and the months ahead, and I'm sure, and I'm looking forward to future conversations that we have together. And if anybody wants to follow your work, go to New Resistance on Telegram. It's if you haven't guessed, it's in the description box under this YouTube video. Check it out, subscribe, share with your friends. Joaquin does very good regular briefings that go on for a while. They're interactive. I hype those out. Joaquin, thank you so much, man.
Thanks for having me.